A girl with monstrous strength who could take down a wild boar with her bare hands.
To become an ordinary wife, she made a tearful vow to her father.
She swore to seal that power away forever, enduring every kind of mistreatment and sorrow. But a corrupt lord took away the only person on her side, her husband. Now she must make a choice. Breaking her 3-year vow, she finally reveals her true self. Can this woman, who pretended she could not even lift a sack of grain, stand against the massive power of the sheriff's court and save her husband? Hello, everyone. I am the narrator. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have not subscribed yet, please press that subscribe and like button. Now, shall we step into today's tale? Long, long ago, during the reign of our good king, there was a place deep in the northern highlands called Elm Pass, just as the name suggests. It was a treacherous mountain road, thickly lined with ancient elm trees. And you had to cross this pass to reach the market town. The mountains were high, the valleys were deep, travelers were few, and you could often hear the howling of wolves in the dark woods. It was that kind of remote, forgotten place, right in the middle of this elm shape. Past a village stood a blacksmith's forge. From morning till night, the ringing of a hammer striking iron never ceased. The village blacksmith was named Brom. He was a man the size of a bear, with dark, fire-baked skin and forearms as thick as a normal man's thighs. Now this Brom had a precious only daughter. Her name was Maud. But let me tell you folks, Maud might have been a blacksmith's daughter, but there was nothing rough about her face. She had pitch-black hair that cascaded down to her waist, gleaming with a healthy shine. Her eyes were large and bright, with eyelashes so long that every time she blinked, it felt like a gentle breeze was blowing. Her lips were full and red, like summer berries, and her skin was a beautiful sun-kissed bronze from running. Around in the open air, she stood tall, with a waist as slender as a willow branch. But her shoulders, arms, and legs were packed with solid, tight muscle. She radiated so much healthy vigor that her wool dress pulled tight with every confident stride. Whenever the village boys saw Maud, their hearts would skip a beat. They would whisper, "Oh, she is so beautiful. I want to marry her." I really want to marry her. But here is the problem. It started when Maud was just 5 years old. Her father, Brom, was working in the forge when he heard a strange noise out in the yard. It sounded like metal groaning. What is that? Brom went outside and saw little Maud holding a heavy pewter tankard in both hands. The solid metal cup was crumpled up like a piece of thin parchment. Maud, put that down! Brom was absolutely terrified. When she was 7, she lifted a massive oak barrel full of salted winter pork right over her head and carried it around the yard in circles. That barrel weighed as much as 3 full sacks of grain. But a 7-year-old girl was carrying it like it was a feather. Brom felt a chill run down his spine. This child is no ordinary child. By the time she turned 10, things got completely out of hand. Maud was playing around in her father's forge and picked up a massive, solid iron smithing club
It was a tool so heavy that it would take the strongest. Grown men in the village grunting and straining just to lift it off the ground. But Maud was spinning it around with one hand. The wind from her swinging was so fierce, it scattered the hot coals across the stone floor of the forge. "Good heavens, child, put that down!" Brom shouted. But inside, his heart was heavy with worry. If the world finds out about this strength, her life will be ruined. In medieval times, for a woman to have that kind of unnatural strength was not a blessing. It was a curse. She would be treated like a monster, accused of witchcraft, never find a husband, and she might even be dragged away to the sheriff's court to be locked up as a freakish spectacle. "Maud," Brom said, holding his daughter's hands tightly, "you must never, ever show your strength to anyone. Do you understand?" "Why, Father?" "Because a woman with the strength of a beast will only find misery in this world. Promise me." "Yes, Father." Little Maud nodded her head. "But folks, do you really think a promise like that could be kept so easily?" It was the autumn of her 15th year. A wild boar the size of a peasant. A cottage appeared in the woods behind the village. It had tusks as thick as a man's arm and eyes that glowed a bloodshot red. Every night it came down to tear up the manor fields, snatch the chickens, and cause absolute havoc. "We need the Lord's huntsman. We must tell the bailiff." The villagers were trembling in fear, but no huntsman came, and the sheriff's court was too far away. There was no one to help them. Then, one early morning, the boar wandered right into the middle of the village. Children were playing in the dirt road, and the beast bared its massive tusks, charging straight at them. "Oh, it is the boar!" the children screamed. The adults were too busy running for their lives. Just then, Maud burst out of her cottage. She hiked up her linen skirting, sprinted barefoot across the mud, running faster than a galloping horse. "Get out of the way!" Maud shouted, planting her feet firmly right in the path of the charging beast. The boar squealed and lunged at Maud, its deadly tusks gleaming. And what do you think Maud did? She clenched her fist tight and brought it down, dead center onto the boar's forehead. A sickening crack echoed through the entire village. The massive boar's eyes rolled back, and it collapsed dead on the spot. One single punch. A 15-year-old girl had taken down a monstrous wild boar with one bare fist. The villager's jaws hit the dirt. Is she even human? Is she a forest spirit? From that day on, Maud earned a nickname, the Beast of Elm Pass. This rumor eventually reached the ears of the local outlaws. Up at Elm Pass, there was a gang of 7 bandits who had set up camp. They were ruthless thugs who extorted pennies from every traveler, stole goods from merchant carts, and harassed any woman who walked by. The bandit leader, Cade, just scoffed at the rumor. "What? A little wench killed a wild boar? Do not make me laugh. Bring the girl to me. She will make a fine evening's entertainment." So Cade sent 2 of his men down to the village. The 2 outlaws stood outside Maud's cottage and started causing a scene. "Hey, bring out the freak girl who killed the pig!" They kicked the wooden gate and hollered. Maud opened the gate and stepped out. The two bandits took one look at her and froze. She was far more beautiful than they had ever imagined. Flowing dark hair, sun-kissed skin, big eyes, and a figure that turned their heads. Wait a minute. What do you mean, monster? She is an absolute beauty. One of the outlaws grinned a wicked grin and reached out his hand. Come here, little lady. Our boss wants to see you. Maud's expression instantly turned cold. Move your hand. The bandit just kept giggling, refusing to pull his hand back. And then, in the very next second, two heavy thuds rang out. The bandit spun twice in the air and flew right over the stone wall. His screams echoed all the way up the mountain road. When Cade, the bandit leader, heard the news, he was furious. What? I sent my men to fetch a girl, and they got beaten? Cade personally led the remaining 5 outlaws and waited for Maud up on the Elm Pass Road. When Maud was heading over the mountain to go to the market town, Cade blocked her path. So you are the freak wench, he sneered, drawing his rusted iron sword. The other 5 raised their wooden clubs and sickles. Maud just gave a little smirk. Move aside, or you will get hurt. What did you say, you little witch? Cade roared and charged at her. Folks, what do you think happened next? Maud reached out, grabbed Cade by the collar of his tunic with one hand, and lifted him straight up into the air. She lifted a grown man off his feet with a single arm. Then she hurled him right into the group of his 5 men. They all crashed to the muddy ground like a set of wooden bowling pins. Mercy! She is a demon! Cade scrambled on his hands and knees, fleeing for his life. After that day, the bandits completely vanished from Elm Pass. Travelers could cross the mountains in peace, and the traveling merchants blessed the name of the beast of Elm Pass for making their journey safe. Now, hearing all this makes you feel good, right? But the real problem started after this. Once Maud's name spread across the entire county, all talk of marriage completely dried up. Absolutely nothing. The young men would look at Maud and think, well, she is beautiful, but how can I marry a woman who punches out wild boars and wipes out 7 armed bandits by herself? I would not have a single unbroken bone left in my body. And so they all ran for the hills. She was past 20 years old, and not a single proposal came her way. In medieval times, for a woman to be unmarried in her 20s was a terrible shame upon her family. Her father, Brom, sighed heavily every single night. Then, one evening, Brom was sitting in front of the forge's hearth fire, staring blankly into the flames, when Maud walked in. "Father, what is wrong?" Brom turned to look at his daughter. In the flickering firelight, her face looked so incredibly lovely. To think that a girl so beautiful and kind-hearted could not find a husband, simply because she was too strong. Maud. Tears welled up in Brom's tired eyes. Please, please, hide your strength. Only then will you be able to marry. It is my fault. I raised you wrong. I was so proud of your strength that I did. Do not think of your future. It is all my fault. Brom reached out and tightly held his daughter's hands. When you go to your husband's house, you must never show your strength. Pretend to be weak. No matter how hard it gets, endure it. Just so you can live as an ordinary woman for the first time. A tear rolled down Maud's cheek. Yes, Father. I promise. This promise, folks, this very promise completely turned Maud's life upside down. The beast of Elm Pass, who made wild boars and outlaws tremble in fear, sealed her power away tight and finally went off to be married. But the household she married into was nothing short of a living hell. How long do you think Maud can keep her strength hidden? The place Maud married into was called Willowbrook. It was a river village about a half-day's walk from Elm Pass. It got its name because beautiful weeping willows lined the riverbanks. The scenery was truly breathtaking. However, the home of her new husband, Alden, was the exact opposite of that beautiful scenery. It was a crumbling timber cottage with a tiny, cramped yard, a soot-stained hearth, and only 2 drafty rooms. She arrived on foot, without even a wooden cart to carry her, and as she stepped into the yard, her new mother-in-law, Agnes, was sitting stiffly on a wooden stool, glaring down at her. Agnes had narrow, judging eyes and thin lips. Sitting there with her back perfectly straight, she looked exactly like a vicious hawk eyeing its prey. Agnes let out a sharp scoff. Well, look at this. A bride coming into my house without a single silver coin for a dowry, bringing nothing but her own body. They say you are a blacksmith's daughter. I suppose since we cannot afford servants, a sturdy peasant girl will have to do. It was her wedding night. A cheap tallow candle flickered dimly in the cold room. As Maud sat there quietly, she heard a sound from the other side of the room. It was her husband, Alden. Alden had a frail frame and a pale, sickly complexion, but his eyes were deep and his face held a very gentle, kind expression. From his worn tunic and the faint smell of parchment and ink hanging in the air, she could tell he was a parish scholar, an educated but poor man. I am sorry, Alden spoke first, his voice thin and raspy. I have been too sickly to take a wife, and I never dared to dream that such a beautiful bride would come to me. Maud slowly raised her head and looked at her husband. His pale face was full of genuine apology, and his eyes were so incredibly warm. As you can see, my family has no wealth, and I do not have the body to work the manor fields properly, Alden said, lowering his head. I am already so sorry that I will only bring you hardship. Maud felt a sudden lump in her throat. Back in Elm Pass, every man ran away when they saw her. Even while calling her beautiful, they were too terrified to come near. But this man was different. He was weak. He had nothing. Yet he was apologizing to her, humbling himself first. It is all right, Maud said softly. I will take good care of you. Alden looked up at Maud. In the warm glow of the tallow candle, her face was truly beautiful. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her skin caught the soft light. Alden's face flushed red, and he quickly turned away. It is easier this way, he stammered. I shall sleep on this side of the chamber. Alden retreated to the far corner and laid out his woolen blankets. Maud smiled softly to herself. He is a truly gentle soul, she thought. If it is for this man, hiding my strength and living as an ordinary wife would not be so terrible. But listen well, my friends, for that peace lasted exactly one single night. The very next morning, before the rooster even crowed, the torment began. Maud, get up! Are you still abed? The sharp, biting voice of Agnes, her mother-in-law, made Maud jolt upright. It was still pitch black outside.
"Milady, what is the matter?" Maud asked. "What is the matter?"
You ask what is the matter? Agnes snapped. Why is the hearth fire not lit?
"When do you plan to bake the morning bread and boil the oats?"
We cannot afford servants, so the blacksmith's daughter must earn her keep. Maud scrambled out of bed and rushed to the cold stone kitchen. She struck the flint, built the fire, boiled the barley porridge, fetched water from the well, and set the wooden table. But Agnes did not even pick up her wooden spoon before her face twisted in a scowl. "What is this slop?" she demanded. "It is too watery to feed to the pigs. Make it again." "Yes, milady," Maud replied, and she made it again. "This time it is hard as a brick. Make it again." "Yes, milady." She made it a third time. Agnes scoffed. What does a blacksmith's daughter know? About cooking? You probably spent your days banging on useless iron. Agnes finally took a bite, only to throw her spoon down in disgust. Then the two sisters-in-law joined the fray. Clara, the lazy older one, whined, "Maud, take my heavy woolen gowns down to the river and wash them." Alice, the suspicious younger one, chimed in, "Maud, sweep the ashes from my chamber and scrub the floorboards." From dawn until the church bells rang for the evening prayer, the chores rained down on Maud. Scrubbing laundry, sweeping the courtyard, hauling heavy buckets of water, chopping firewood, tending the hearth, feeding the chickens and the mule. Maud alone was doing the work of 4 servants, carrying the weight of Agnes, the 2 sisters, and her sickly husband. And what of Alden? "My dear, I am so sorry," he would whisper between coughing fits, unable to say a single word of defiance to his mother. If Alden ever tried to step in, Agnes would turn fierce. "It is because you are sick that I brought in a sturdy peasant girl to do the labor." "Keep quiet," she would shout. So Maud clenched her teeth and endured. "It is fine," she told herself. "I made a promise to my father Brahm. If I show my unnatural strength, they will call me a witch and burn me. I just have to bear it. But let me tell you, hiding such immense power is no easy task. It is almost a comedy, yet deeply pitiful." One afternoon, Agnes ordered Maud to move 5 heavy sacks of rye into the manor storehouse. "Maud, carry those sacks to the back pantry before sunset." "Yes, milady," Maud said. She walked over to the sacks. Now one of these sacks was heavy enough to make a grown farmhand grunt and strain his back. Maud casually reached down and lifted one with a single hand. It was light as a feather to her, like picking up a bundle of wool. But suddenly, she heard heavy footsteps on the cobblestones. It was Agnes approaching. Startled, Maud quickly dropped the sack, then grabbed it again with both arms, wrapping herself around it. "Oh, heavens, it is so heavy!" she groaned loudly.
She scrunched up her face, made her legs tremble, and took slow, staggering steps. Agnes looked down from the porch and clicked her tongue. Look at that pathetic sight. You cannot even carry a single sack of grain. Properly? You are weak and useless, bringing nothing but shame to this house. Maud thought to herself, if you only knew. But out loud she panted, I am so sorry, milady. I am just a bit frail. She kept up the act. Can you imagine it? A woman who could crush a wild boar with her bare hands and toss 7 armed bandits into the mud was pretending to stagger under the weight of a grain sack. It should have been funny, but it was just breaking her heart. These close calls happened all the time. In the winter of her first year at the estate, Agnes ordered her to chop firewood. Split all those logs before the sun goes down, she commanded. Maud picked up the heavy iron axe. Naturally, one swing would have split the thick oak log clean in half, perhaps even shattering the chopping block beneath it. But she could not do that, so she intentionally held back, tapping the wood softly. Oh, my poor arms, she pretended to complain. A job that should have taken her an hour stretched into 4 grueling hours. Sweat poured down her back like rain, not from the labor, but from the sheer exhaustion of holding back her strength. In the spring of her second year, disaster nearly struck by the river. Maud was washing the heavy linens. Without thinking, she pressed down hard to wring out the water, and the large river stone she was using as a washboard cracked straight down the middle with a loud crunch. Oh no, Maud gasped. She looked around frantically. Thank the heavens no one was watching. She quickly shoved the 2 halves of the stone back together and smeared thick river mud over the crack to hide it. Just then, Alice strolled by. Maud, what are you doing? She asked, her eyes narrowing. Nothing, just scrubbing the tunics, Maud stammered. What is wrong with that stone? Alice asked, leaning in. It was already cracked. It is a very old stone, Maud lied smoothly. Alice tilted her head, looking suspicious, but eventually walked away. Maud let out a long breath, clutching her chest. That was far too close. Carrying water was another ordeal. During the summer drought of her second year, the village well ran dry, and Maud had to fetch water from a distant stream. She filled 2 massive wooden buckets and hung them on a thick wooden yoke. Out of habit, she lifted the entire yoke, buckets and all, with one hand. But Alice was walking up the dirt path right behind her. Maud, are you lifting that entire yoke with one hand? She shrieked. What? No. I was just holding it with one hand while I stretched my back with the other. My lower back is aching terribly. Maud quickly dropped the yoke onto both shoulders and began to stagger, groaning dramatically. Oh, my poor back. The pain is unbearable. Alice gave her a deeply suspicious glare, but said nothing more. But the true crisis always came at night. Every night, after the household had fallen asleep, Maud would sneak out into the moonlit courtyard. Having suppressed her nature all day, she needed to release just a little bit of her pent-up energy. There was a massive stone mill in the corner of the yard, used for grinding wheat.
Maud would place a single finger on the heavy stone and spin it in circles. The quiet friction of the stone slowly eased the deep frustration in her chest. But one night, while the millstone was spinning, she heard the wooden door creak open behind her. It was Alice. Startled, Maud instantly pulled her hand away. But here was the problem. She had already pushed the massive stone with such force that its momentum kept it moving. The heavy millstone was spinning, rapidly all by itself. What on earth? Alice's eyes bulged out of her head. Maud, the millstone is spinning on its own. It is just the wind, Maud blurted out. A very strong midnight gust of wind. It is turning the stone. Wind? Alice screamed. It is a demon. A ghost is in the yard. Her shrieks woke the entire manor. Agnes burst out of her chamber. Clara came running, and Alden stumbled out, coughing violently. What is all this racket? Agnes bellowed. Maud quickly slammed her hands onto the millstone to force it to a halt. Oh, milady, it is nothing, she said. I felt stifled in my chamber and came out for some air, and I fear I startled young Alice in the dark. What are you doing wandering the yard in the dead of night? Are you a madwoman? Agnes roared, her voice echoing off the stone walls. Maud simply bowed her head. I am sorry, milady. It will not happen again. Back in their cold room, Maud lay beneath the woolen blankets and bit her lip. Her fingernails dug so deeply into her palms that they drew blood. But she did not feel the pain. Her heart hurt much more. How long must I live like a shadow? What sin did I commit to deserve this? Just then, a soft voice broke the silence. My dear, it was Alden. Are you all right? Yes, I am fine, she whispered. In the dark, Alden reached out and gently found her hand. I do not know what burdens you carry in secret, he said softly. But know this, I am on your side. Tears spilled from Maud's eyes, rolling down her cheeks into the linen pillow. This man, she thought, I must protect this man, no matter what happens. But listen well, my friends, for after that tender night, a true nightmare descended upon the land. The petty cruelty of a mother-in-law was nothing compared to the devil that arrived in the county. It was the autumn of her 3rd year of marriage. Whispers spread through the river village. They say a new sheriff has been appointed to the county seat. Who is the lord? A nobleman from the capital, they say. He bought the king's favor. The villagers gossiped by the mill, but at first they thought little of it. Lords and sheriffs changed often enough. But this man was no ordinary sheriff. His name was Godfrey. He was a greedy, ruthless man of 45 years who had paid a fortune in gold to the crown, authority to buy his position. And when a man buys his seat of power, what does he do? He bleeds the land dry to make his gold back tenfold. On his very first day at the sheriff's court, Godfrey lined up the bailiffs and stewards in the muddy market square. Bring me the manor land records and the tax rolls for the entire Shire, he commanded. I want them before the sun sets. The stewards scurried and brought piles of sealed parchment. Godfrey flipped through the vellum pages, a wicked smirk twisting his lips. "So many tenant farmers in this county," he murmured.
Excellent. Most excellent. He tapped his leather riding crop against his boot and let out a dark, booming laugh. The sound was so chilling that even his own guards shivered in their chainmail. His first victim was Silas, the village elder. Godfrey rode into the village with 3 armed deputies. He stood before Silas and shoved a forged parchment into the old man's chest. "Listen well, old man," Godfrey sneered. "You owe back taxes on your 4 acres of barley fields.
Hand over 10 silver coins immediately."
10 silver coins? Silas gasped. "My lord, I have paid my tithes and taxes to the crown every season." "What is the meaning of this? What, are you calling the sheriff's writ a lie?" Silas tried to plead his case, but do you know what the result was? 30 lashes with a heavy leather whip. They beat him and beat him and beat him again. Silas spat blood into the dirt, crying out, "This is unjust! I am an innocent man!" But his cries fell on deaf ears. The villagers watched in absolute terror, trembling in the cold wind. "Do you see this?" Godfrey shouted, turning to the frightened peasants. "This is the fate of those who defy the sheriff's court. Pay the taxes I demand, and you shall live in peace. Defy me, and you will end up like this old fool." A dark cloud of fear settled over the village. No one dared to speak a word of protest. That night, Agnes sat by the hearth fire and let out a heavy sigh. "This village is doomed. With a monster like that as sheriff, we are all finished." And it did not stop there, my friends. Godfrey did not just target the river. He used the same wicked scheme across every parish in the county. He forged tax debts, claimed peasants had missed their harvest payments, or demanded exorbitant interest on winter grain loans. He stole their manor fields. If they could not pay, he had them flogged. If they still could not pay, he seized their cottages and livestock. In just 3 months, 8 of the 20 families in the village lost their land. Those who owned fields became starving tenant farmers, and the tenant farmers were reduced to begging on the castle road. The village was brought to ruin. Maud's household was no exception. One freezing morning, 2 deputies pounded on their wooden door. "Is this the house of Alden? The sheriff demands your presence." "You owe 3 years of back taxes on your 2 small fields." "Hand over 20 silver shillings within 10 days? What?" Agnes's face turned as pale as a ghost. "We have never missed a single payment." "Where is your proof?" The deputy shoved a rolled parchment into her hands. It was filled with Alden's name and a massive sum of fabricated debt. Alden stumbled out of his chamber, coughing weakly. He took the parchment from his mother's trembling hands. Now Alden was a parish scholar, a man who knew how to read the king's English and study the law. He read the document carefully, and his eyes widened. "Wait a moment," Alden said, his voice shaking but firm. "The wax seal stamped on this parchment? This is not the official seal of the county court. And the handwriting, it does not belong to the royal scribe or the magistrate. This document is a forgery." My friends, those brave words sealed his fate. The deputy's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "What did you say?" Are you accusing the sheriff's court of forging royal documents? I call it a forgery because it is a forgery. Look at the wax seal. The crest is wrong, and the ink is completely different. Alden held the parchment high for them to see. The deputy snatched the parchment back and drew his club. You madman! I shall report this to Sheriff Godfrey. Prepare yourself. The die was cast. When the sun hung high in the sky, 4 of the sheriff's deputies stormed into the river village. The heavy wooden door of the cottage rattled with loud, violent knocks. Alden, come out here! Maud rushed out from the small bakehouse. The 4 deputies were standing in the muddy yard, and her husband Alden was stepping down from the threshold. What is the meaning of this? Alden asked. By the order of Sheriff Godfrey. You are under arrest for insulting the sheriff's court, calling a royal writ a forgery, and mocking an officer of the law? But I only spoke the truth. Shut your mouth. One of the deputies grabbed Alden by the collar. Alden stumbled, a harsh cough erupting from his chest. This is unjust. I have proof the parchment is false. Silence! Drag him away! Husband! Maud rushed forward into the yard. The deputies were dragging her husband away, his worn leather shoes trailing helplessly in the mud. A terrifying surge of power rushed through Maud's body. If she just reached out, she could grab these deputies and hurl them against the stone wall. She could save her husband right now, her fists clenched tightly. But then she remembered her father's face. Maud, please, hide your strength. Maud bit her lips so hard it nearly bled. She forced her fists to unclench. My lords, please, my husband is a sickly man. If you throw him in the cold dungeon, he will die. Maud fell to her knees in the mud and begged. The deputy shoved her hard. Out of the way, you peasant wench! Maud collapsed into the dirt. As Alden was dragged away, he looked back at her. Wife, do not worry for me. I shall be fine. Fine? How could a man who could not even stop coughing survive being locked in a cold stone dungeon? Maud sat there in the mud, watching the backs of the men taking her husband away. Tears fell from her eyes like pouring rain. Agnes fainted from the shock. Alden, my boy, Clara wailed loudly, while Alice rushed to support their collapsed mother-in-law. The villagers had gathered around, but no one dared to step forward to help. They were all terrified of Sheriff Godfrey. Alden is doomed. No one crosses the new sheriff and lives to tell the tale. The hushed whispers of the village gossips reached Maud's ears, piercing her heart like iron nails. It happened that very night. After the family had cried themselves to sleep from exhaustion, Maud quietly slipped out of the thatched cottage. She ran all the way to the sheriff's manor without stopping. A journey that would take a normal person 2 hours to walk, Maud covered in less than half an hour. She crouched low beneath the high stone wall of the dungeon. From the other side of the wall, she heard a sound. A wet, hacking cough. It was her husband, and then a low groan of pain. He had been beaten with the guards' clubs. Maud felt as though her heart was being ripped to shreds. Husband. Maud pressed her forehead against the cold stone wall and whispered, "Just stay alive. Please, just stay alive." She clenched her fist tightly, and in that moment, the solid stone wall she was leaning against began to crack. She had been so consumed by grief that she did not even realize the strength gathering in her hand. What was that? What is that noise? A deputy's voice echoed from the other side of the wall. The flickering light of a torch was approaching. Maud hurriedly hid herself in the shadows. The guard inspected the wall and muttered, "Strange." Did the masonry crack before walking away? Hidden in the darkness, Maud looked down at her own fist. Her fingers were trembling. "If I push this wall right now, it will crumble. I can go in there and save my husband. I can toss those guards aside with a single hand." But if she did that, she would be guilty of assaulting the king's men and breaking open a royal dungeon. Not just her husband, but Agnes and the entire family would be dragged to the gallows as traitors. Brute strength alone was not enough. She had to find another way. Maud bit her lip and turned away. Her footsteps felt as heavy as lead. Behind her, her husband's coughing slowly faded into the night. When Maud returned home, she could not bring herself to enter the cottage. She crouched in the yard and looked up at the sky. The moon was shining with a cold, pale light. What must I do? If I use my strength, my family is in danger. If I do not use my strength, my husband will die. Then a place suddenly came to her mind. The mountain pass. Brahm. Listen well, my friends. The incredible power that had been tightly sealed away for 3 long years was finally about to be unleashed. But there was only one man in this world who could grant her the permission to break that seal. It was the dawn of the next day. Before the sun even broke the horizon, Maud left the cottage. Agnes was still sick in bed, and Clara and Alice were busy tending to her. Without saying a word to anyone, Maud began to run toward the mountain pass. For a normal traveler, it was a half-day's journey on foot. Maud reached the high ridge in just 2 hours. She was not even out of breath, even though she had hidden it for 3 years. Her body remembered. These legs, these arms, this heart. As she crossed the ridge, the blacksmith's forge came into view. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of a hammer striking iron rang through the crisp air. It was the exact same sound from 3 years ago. Hot tears welled up in Maud's eyes. Father. Maud pushed open the heavy wooden door of the forge. Brahm stopped mid-swing and turned around. The moment he saw his daughter's face, the heavy iron hammer slipped from his grasp and crashed to the floor. Maud. It had been 3 years. She had not been able to send a single letter, nor did she have the time to visit. Buried under the crushing weight of her harsh chores at the manor, Brahm walked toward his daughter. "Why is your face so thin? Have they not been giving you enough bread?" Standing before her father, everything Maud had held back for so long threatened to pour out all at once. But she swallowed it down. She had not come here to cry. She had come to ask for something. "Father?" Maud's voice was solid and unyielding. "I have something to say." Brahm looked into his daughter's eyes. That gaze
The fiery gaze from the day she fought the wild beast in the forest had returned. "Come in and sit," he said. Brom led his daughter deeper into the forge. The hearth fire was roaring, glowing a fierce orange. The two sat facing each other before the flames. Maud began to speak. From beginning to end, she told him everything, leaving not a single detail out. She told him of Agnes's cruelty, of Clara and Alice's scorn, and how she had endured it all in silence. She told him that her husband Alden was the only one who stood by her side. She explained how the corrupt Sheriff Godfrey was stealing the village lands, using forged parchments. She told him how her husband had noticed the forgery, spoken against it, and was thrown into the dungeon. And she told him how Alden was beaten with clubs and was coughing up blood in the cold dark. "Father," Maud looked straight into Brom's eyes, "I am going to use my strength." A heavy silence fell over the forge. The hearth fire crackled and popped in the quiet room. Tears began to well up in Brom's eyes. "Maud," Brom's voice cracked. "When I told you to hide your strength," he could barely finish his words. "It was because I wanted you to live a normal life. I wanted you to marry like other women, to live like other women, without being pointed at and feared as a monster." Brom lowered his head. "But that choice has put your husband in the dungeon." "It is my fault. It is not your fault, Father." Maud shook her head. "Because of you, I endured these 3 years. If you had not told me to hide it, I would have tossed Agnes onto the thatched roof on the very first day of my marriage." Brom let out a weak chuckle. Maud chuckled as well. But soon, both of their faces turned dead serious. "Maud, let me ask you one thing," Brom said. "If you use that strength, there may be no turning back. If you strike the sheriff's men, you could be branded an outlaw. Will you still do it?" Maud did not hesitate for a second. "If my husband dies in that cell, I am as good as dead. Watching Agnes and my sisters-in-law suffer while I stand by and do nothing, is that truly living? I would rather use my strength and face the gallows." Brom stood up from his seat. He walked over to the far wall of the forge. Something was hanging there, wrapped tightly in a thick, dust-covered cloth. Brom reached out and pulled the cloth away. It was a massive iron mace. The very same mace Maud used to spin around like a wooden toy when she was just 10 years old. It was a weapon so heavy that the strongest grown man in the village would struggle to even lift it off the ground. But Brom managed to bring it down from the wall with both hands, his muscles straining. When he set it on the ground, the heavy wooden floorboards shook with a loud thud. "Maud." Brom stood before the iron mace and looked at his daughter. Tears were streaming down his weathered face, but his voice was like steel. "It is time to use your strength." Maud's heart pounded fiercely in her chest. "Protect your husband. Protect your family. Protect your village." Brom grabbed his daughter's shoulders with both hands. The rough, calloused hands of the old blacksmith were trembling as they held her. "But Maud," Brom's eyes grew solemn, "remember this. Strength must only be used to protect people. If you let anger blind you and use it to harm others, you are no better than the ruthless bandits in the woods.
Do you understand? Yes, Father. Maud nodded. She knelt before the iron mace and reached out with both hands. The moment her fingers wrapped around the cold iron, a thrill of lightning shot through her entire body. The immense power that she had kept tightly sealed away for 3 years spread from her fingertips, up her arms, through her shoulders, and into every fiber of her being. It felt as though a frozen river had suddenly burst forth in the warmth of spring. Maud lifted the massive iron mace into the air with a single hand. It was light. It felt as light as a goose feather. She slowly spun the weapon in a circle, and the sheer force of the wind it created blew all the thick dust out of the forge. Brom watched his daughter in awe. Her long, dark hair whipped in the wind, and the glowing light of the hearth fire danced across her skin. Thick, powerful muscles flexed on her forearms as she gripped the iron weapon, and sparks seemed to fly from her fierce eyes. Ah, this is my daughter's true form. A breathless laugh escaped Brom's lips. The quiet, obedient daughter-in-law, who walked around with hunched shoulders and a bowed head, was completely gone. The hidden giant had finally returned. Thank you, Father. Maud rested the heavy iron mace effortlessly on her shoulder. I will return. Maud! Brom called out to her. Maud looked back. Be careful. Brom's voice choked with emotion. Make sure you come back alive. I will. Maud smiled brightly. The confident, fearless smile from the day she took down the wild beast had returned to her face. Maud stepped out of the mountain forge and began to make her way toward the sheriff's estate. No, she did not walk. She ran, sprinting down the rugged mountain path with the massive iron mace. Resting on her shoulder, Maud looked like a mighty knight charging into battle. Her wool dress billowed wildly in the wind, and her long hair flew behind her like a war banner. The sun was beginning to set. She could not afford to be late. Her husband was barely holding on in that dungeon. Day by agonizing day, the rocky path blurred beneath her swift feet. In less than an hour, she reached the high hill overlooking the sheriff's manor. She looked down at the estate. High stone walls, watchtowers, and guards holding burning torches were stationed everywhere. It was a fortress that no commoner would ever dare to breach. But Maud was different. Hold on, husband, Maud muttered under her breath. I am coming, but listen well, my friends. Maud did not just charge in blindly. This woman was not only blessed with superhuman strength, but she also had a sharp, calculating mind. If she simply smashed through the front gates, the guards would swarm her, the sheriff would call for the king's soldiers, and she would be branded a traitor. Her family would be put in grave danger. Maud sat in the shadows of the hill and carefully observed the manor. She memorized the guards' patrol routes, the blind spots where the torchlight did not reach, and the exact location of the dungeon. And she noticed one more thing. At the very back of the estate stood a large, grand manor hall, its windows glowing brightly with candlelight. That must be Sheriff Godfrey's private quarters. If the dungeon is over there, then the blind spot is... Maud's eyes flashed in the dark. There, the corner of the eastern wall. No torches and no guards. The sun vanished completely, and a thick darkness settled over the land. Maud began to move. She ran silently through the pitch-black night. With the heavy iron mace strapped securely to her back, she kept her body low and moved as swiftly as the wind. She reached the corner of the eastern wall and placed her hand against the cold masonry. It was a thick wall, built of heavy stone and mortar. It was about 1.5 feet thick. Maud pressed her finger gently against the mortar of the stone wall. With a soft crumble, the dried earth and lime gave way, creating a small hole. Quietly, bit by bit, she widened the breach. Once it was large enough for her body to fit through, Maud slipped inside. She was inside the manor compound. In the darkness, her heart pounded heavily against her chest. The light of torches flickered in. The distance and the heavy footsteps of the sheriff's deputies echoed intermittently across the cobblestones. Maud crouched low, melting into the shadows. The dungeon is to the north. I just need to head that way. Step by step, Maud made her way toward the holding cells. The weight of the heavy iron mace strapped to her back felt immense. But she was not afraid of that weight. If anything, it brought her comfort. It was the strength her father, Brom, had handed to her. The strength her father had finally permitted her to use. Now, with this power, she would save her husband. In the dark, Maud's eyes flashed fiercely. They were the eyes of the hidden, beast of her mountain village, and there, right in front of her, stood the iron-bound door of the dungeon. Listen closely now, for this is where the true tale begins. She stood before the dungeon. A thick iron crossbar was wrapped tight with heavy chains, and right in front of it, 2 manor guards were dozing. The light from a nearby torch flickered and swayed in the cold wind. Maud took a deep breath. I cannot stay quiet from here on out. The moment I am seen, it is war. Am I ready? I am ready. Maud stepped out from the darkness. Deadening the sound of her footsteps, she stood right behind the guards. The 2 men had their heads bowed, nodding off in the chill of the night. Maud reached out with both hands and lightly tapped the backs of their heads. With 2 dull thuds, the guards' heads snapped forward, and they collapsed straight to the ground, out cold. They did not even have the chance to cry out. Maud dragged the guards and laid them down in a dark corner. Forgive me, gentlemen. Just sleep for a little while. Now, it was just the dungeon door. It was a door made of double-layered oak, banded with thick iron. It was a sturdy door that would take an ordinary man half a day to break through, even with a woodcutter's axe. Maud stood before the door. She grabbed the iron crossbar with both hands. She gritted her teeth. The veins in her forearms bulged. Beneath her sun-kissed skin, her muscles rippled and swelled with terrifying tension. The iron crossbar screamed under her grip. The metal began to bend. Then, with a deafening crack, the iron bar snapped in 2. A solid rod of iron
as thick as a man's forearm, had been folded like a piece of
soft, warm bread. Maud tossed the broken crossbar to the side.
It hit the stone floor with a heavy, ringing clang. Maud pushed the oak door with both hands. No, she did not just push it.
She tore it clean off. With a massive crash, the heavy door was ripped from its
iron hinges and slammed onto the stone floor inside.
Dust rose up like a storm. Through the swirling dust, she could see inside.
It was a cramped, damp cell. In the corner, a single figure was curled up on the cold stone. His wrists and ankles were bound in heavy iron chains, and his back was covered in the brutal, bloody welts of a severe lashing. His linen shirt was soaked in blood, and his face was terribly swollen.
"My love," Maud's voice trembled. Alden lifted his head. In his half-opened eyes, there was only stark terror at first.
He thought the guards had returned to flog him again. But the face he saw through the settling dust was his wife's.
"Maud, it is me, my love. I am here."
Maud rushed into the cell. She grabbed the iron chains wrapped around Alden's wrists. The chains had dug deep into his flesh, leaving his wrists a bloody mess. Tears fell from Maud's eyes. A blazing fury surged within her.
"What crime did my husband commit? He only spoke the truth."
He only called a forged parchment what it was. Maud gripped the iron chains with both hands and pulled. The heavy links shrieked and then snapped like fragile parchment. One side, then the other. All 4 lengths of chain shattered and fell to the stone floor.
"How did you—"
Alden's eyes widened in utter disbelief. His wife had just broken iron chains with her bare hands. She had torn down an oak dungeon door. She had snapped an iron crossbar.
How could this make any sense?
"I will explain everything later," Maud said, gently supporting Alden to his feet. "Right now, we must leave this place."
"Wait,"
Alden said, grabbing Maud's arm. "You cannot just leave. There are documents in the sheriff's private quarters." Alden's eyes changed. His body was battered and broken, but his gaze was razor sharp. "While I was locked in this cell, I heard the guards talking. They were gossiping. Sheriff Godfrey is keeping the forged deeds right alongside the original manor records. He cannot destroy the originals because he must soon present them to the royal exchequer to hide his embezzlement from the king while using the fakes to bleed us dry. Yes, the true estate ledgers and the parish registry. If we compare them to his forged deeds, the sheriff's fraud will be exposed at a single glance. If we have that proof, we can bring the sheriff down for good." Maud's eyes gleamed. He was right. She could smash dungeon doors with her strength. But to truly ruin the corrupt sheriff, she needed proof. "Where are they?" she asked. "The largest manor hall at the back of the compound. The second room inside is the archive," Alden replied. "I understand." Maud lifted Alden onto her back. He was incredibly light. He was so light that it broke her heart. Starved and beaten, he had wasted away to almost nothing. "My love, am I not too heavy for you?" Alden whispered. "Heavy? You are lighter than a bundle of sheep's wool," she replied. "You must have a great many things to tell me," Alden said
with a bitter smile against her shoulder. "Yes, I have a great many things to tell you." But later, not now. Carrying Alden on her back, Maud slipped out of the dungeon. Outside, the thick darkness still blanketed the yard. But someone might have heard the sound of the oak door shattering. There was no time to lose. First, she carried Alden to a safe patch of thick brush near the outer manor wall and set him down gently. "Do not move from this spot, no matter what happens. I am going to get those documents." "It is too dangerous," Alden pleaded. "Do not worry. I am the beast of the mountain, remember?" Maud gave him a fierce, confident smile. Alden stared blankly at his wife. Standing there under the pale moonlight, she looked like a completely different person. Her shoulders were no longer hunched in submission. Her back was as straight as a drawn longbow, and her eyes burned with an undeniable fire. Was she always this tall? Were her shoulders always this broad? "Is this truly the woman I married?" "I will be right back," Maud said, turning away and vanishing back over the compound wall. The sheriff's private quarters at the back of the estate was a grand, timber-framed hall with a slate roof. Maud vaulted over the inner wall and landed softly in the rear courtyard. The heavy wooden door was locked tight. A locked door was something she could force open with a single finger. But she could not afford to make a sound. Maud slipped her fingers into the narrow gap between the door and the frame, gently pressing against the internal iron latch. With a soft click, the door opened silently. The second room inside was a small chamber, acting as the archive. As she opened the door, the dry smell of old parchment, wax, and ink filled her nose. Piles of documents and rolled scrolls were stacked high on the wooden shelves. Maud quickly sifted through them. Estate ledgers, parish registries, bundles of debt records. And then she found them. The true estate ledger and the forged land deeds were sitting right next to each other. Comparing the two, the truth was obvious at a single glance. The genuine ledger bore the royal wax seal, confirming that the crown taxes had been paid in full, while the forged deed falsely claimed the peasants were heavily in arrears. The wax seals were completely different, and the shade of the ink did not match. This was the exact fraud her husband, Alden, had spotted. Maud clutched the bundle of parchments tightly to her chest. "This is it. With this proof, I can end the sheriff's reign of terror." Just then, a shout echoed behind her. "Who goes there?" Maud spun around to see 3 manor guards standing at the doorway, their iron broadswords drawn. The bright light of their torches illuminated Maud's face. It is a woman, a thief. One of the guards charged at her, swinging his heavy blade. Maud merely twisted her body to the side, and the deadly steel sliced through empty air. Maud reached out and grabbed the flat of the guard's broadsword with her bare hand. What? The guard tried to yank his weapon back, but it would not budge an inch. Maud twisted the blade. The steel groaned loudly, bending like a soft reed. What in God's name? The guard's face drained of all color. Maud grabbed him by the collar of his tunic and hurled him to the side. He crashed into the stone wall with a sickening thud and slumped to the floor, unconscious. The remaining 2 guards screamed and tried to flee, but Maud was faster. She grabbed one by his thick leather jerkin, lifted him clean off his feet, and slammed him straight up into the heavy timber beams of the ceiling. She caught the other by the ankle, spun him around like a rag doll, and hurled him out the door into the courtyard. 3 seconds. It took exactly 3 seconds for all 3 armed guards to be utterly defeated. But the commotion had been too loud. "A thief! A thief in the manor hall!" Shouts erupted from every direction. Torches flared up one by one, and the thunder of heavy boots approached rapidly. Clutching the documents tightly to her chest, Maud burst out of the private quarters and into the main manor courtyard. Over 20 armed guards were swarming the yard. Wielding swords, spears, and heavy wooden cudgels, they surrounded her on all sides. "Do not let her escape! Seize her!" Maud unfastened the heavy iron mace strapped to her back and gripped it in one hand. She brought the massive weapon down against the cobblestones with a single devastating strike. The impact shook the earth, and the stone courtyard cracked and splintered outward like a giant spider web. The guards stumbled back, freezing in their tracks. "Step aside," Maud's voice rang out, low and unyielding. "Step aside, and you will not be harmed. The madwoman is bluffing." "Attack her all at once!" the captain of the guard roared. The men surged forward in unison. Maud swung her iron mace in a massive, sweeping arc. The heavy metal tore through the air with a terrifying howl. 5 guards struck by the mace were launched violently into the air like scattered leaves. But the others thrust their iron-tipped spears at her. Maud casually swatted the weapons aside with her mace. The thick ashwood shafts shattered instantly, sending the spearheads clattering to the ground. "A monster! She is no mortal woman!" The guards backed away, their faces pale with absolute terror. Resting the iron mace on her shoulder, Maud walked casually through the parted sea of men. Not a single soul dared to stop her. The main gate of the manor compound loomed ahead. It was barred shut. Maud brought her iron mace crashing into the massive wooden structure. With an explosive boom, the heavy oak gate shattered into 1,000 pieces, blowing outward into the street. Splinters of wood rained down in all directions. Just as Maud stepped through the ruined gateway, the frantic clatter of horse hooves echoed behind her. She turned to see a man on horseback charging across the courtyard. Dressed only in a silk nightshirt, his hair wild and disheveled, it was Sheriff Godfrey. Woken by the chaos, he was furious. "What is the meaning of this? My manor! My dungeon!" Godfrey's face was flushed crimson with rage. Behind him, 30 more guards were rushing into the yard to back him up. Maud stood her ground, planting herself directly in the path of the charging horse. The war horse neighed wildly and reared up on its hind legs. Godfrey clung desperately to the reins, nearly losing his balance. "Out of my way! Move, you wretched peasant!" Maud simply raised her hand and gave the massive horse a gentle push with her open palm. Truly, just a light tap. Yet the huge beast staggered backward, lost its footing, and collapsed heavily onto its side.
Sheriff Godfrey was violently thrown from the saddle, tumbling into the mud and dirt of the courtyard. Godfrey screamed in panic, scrambling backward on his hands and knees. Maud approached him slowly. Thud. Thud. She slammed the head of her mace into the cobblestones with every deliberate step she took toward him. Maud's voice echoed across the entire manor courtyard. Do you know the weight of your sins? Maud pulled the bundle of parchments from her chest and held them high in the air. Do you know what these are? Your forged deeds and the true estate ledgers. You forced these fake documents upon honest peasants who paid their crown taxes, faithfully stealing their lands and livelihoods. The proof of your treachery is all right here. Sheriff Godfrey's face turned as white as a sheet. Where did you get those? I took them from your archive room, Maud said, flashing a cold smile. Thank you for keeping the evidence so neatly organized for me. Dozens of guards stood in a wide circle around them, but no one dared to intervene. They had just watched this woman tear an oak door from its hinges, snap iron chains, pulverize the main gate, and swat away heavily armed men like flies. Who in their right mind would dare challenge her now? I am taking these documents straight to the Royal Assizes in London, Maud declared for all to hear. I will expose every foul deed and corrupt act you have committed in this shire. No, you cannot do that. Godfrey groveled in the mud, reaching out his trembling hands. If you take those to the crown, I am finished. Please, I beg of you. Then you are finished, Maud said with ice in her voice. Considering the innocent lives you have ruined, this is a mercy compared to what you truly deserve. Without another word, Maud turned her back on him and vanished into the darkness of the night. Sheriff Godfrey's desperate screams echoed behind her, but she did not look back. Maud disappeared into the thick shadows of the woods, navigating the uneven terrain until she reached the dense bushes where she had hidden her husband. Alden gasped as he saw her emerge from the gloom. He tried to force himself up from the damp earth, but his battered legs gave out beneath him, causing him to stumble wildly. His body was completely broken from the dungeon's cruelty. Maud rushed forward, dropping to her knees to catch him before he hit the ground, wrapping her strong arms around his trembling frame. "Did you find the parchments?" Alden asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I have them all," Maud replied softly. She pulled the heavy stack of documents from beneath her cloak and held them out in the pale moonlight. The genuine manor ledger and the stack of forged writs rested in her hands. Tears welled up in Alden's eyes, spilling over his bruised cheeks. "You did it, Maud. You truly did it." "It is not over yet," Maud said, her voice steady and resolute. "We must show this proof to the world." Without hesitation, she lifted her husband onto her back, securing him gently but firmly. Carrying Alden's weight as easily as a bundle of wool, Maud ran through the darkness of the night. There was only one place to go, the muddy market square of the village. It was the heart of the Shire, the place where everyone would gather as soon as the sun rose. Listen closely, my friends, for we have reached the final strike of the hammer. Dawn was just beginning to break over the rolling hills.
The villagers were slowly making their way into the market square,
For it was the day of the great village fair. Merchants were unhitching their wooden carts, wives were setting down their woven baskets of salted mutton, hard cheese, and oatcakes,
and children were already running about the stalls. It seemed like any other ordinary, freezing morning in medieval England. Then, a sudden murmur rippled from the entrance of the square. What in heaven's name is that? Is that a woman carrying a grown man? Heads turned. Conversations stopped dead. Maud was walking down the main dirt path. She bore her husband, Alden, on her back, her massive iron mace gripped tightly in one hand and the thick stack of sealed parchments in the other. Her linen gown was torn and covered in mud and dust. Her hood had fallen back, and her hair cascaded wildly over her shoulders. Yet, despite her ragged appearance, her eyes blazed like hearth fires, fierce and unyielding. Is that not Alden's wife? Lord above, it is Maud. What has happened to her? And why is Alden covered in so much blood? The whispers spread like wildfire. Maud walked to the very center of the muddy market square and gently lowered Alden to sit upon a wooden crate. As the villagers crowded around, they gasped and covered their mouths in horror at the sight of him. Merciful heavens, he has been flogged. Look at his face. He is half dead. Maud stood tall and spoke. Her voice rang out like a church bell, echoing off the cold stone church and the surrounding thatched cottages. Hear me, all of you. The murmuring ceased instantly. Every eye in the square was fixed upon Maud. Do you know why my husband, Alden, was thrown into the dark dungeon? Sheriff Godfrey forged false land writs to steal our manor fields. When my husband discovered the truth and declared the documents to be fakes, the sheriff locked him in chains and had him tortured. A shocked murmur swept through the crowd. Is that true? Surely the sheriff would not dare. Maud raised the heavy stack of parchments high above her head for all to see. I hold the proof right here. This heavy book is the true ledger from the manor vault. Beside your names, the royal seal proves your taxes have been paid in full. With silver coins. But look at this. Maud unfurled a separate roll of parchment. These are the forged writs the sheriff created. They bear the exact same names, but they claim your taxes are years in arrears. The wax seals are false, and the ink is completely different. Silas, the village elder, pushed his way to the front of the crowd. He squinted at the documents. Wait, hold still. My name is on there. Silas looked back and forth between the true ledger and the forged writ. His weathered face turned crimson with absolute fury. It is true. I paid every penny of my taxes to the crown. Yet this false paper says I owe 3 years of silver. This is the lie he used to seize my family's land. My name is there too, and mine. He took my father's farm. Outcries erupted from every corner of the square. Men and women who had lost their lands, peasants who had been beaten by the guards, and families who had their worldly possessions confiscated, stepped forward. That corrupt lord deceived us all. He robbed us blind.
Anger spread through the village fair like a roaring wildfire. But just at that moment, the heavy thud of horse hooves echoed down the castle road. Dust plumed at the edge of the market square. Sheriff Godfrey had arrived, leading 30 heavily armed manor guards.
"Seize that low-born woman! Tear those parchments from her hands!" Godfrey shrieked from atop his horse. His face was twisted in sheer malice.
Grinding his teeth in humiliation over how she had broken his stronghold before dawn, the guards drew their steel swords and marched into the square. The unarmed villagers screamed and scattered in terror. Maud stepped protectively in front of Alden, raising her heavy iron mace, her knuckles white.
"Must I break more bones today?" Maud muttered, clenching her jaw.
But then, my friends, a miracle occurred. The piercing blast of royal trumpets
suddenly shattered the morning air. From the castle road,
a grand procession of royal knights, clad in gleaming chainmail, rode into the market square, their heavy destriers shaking the earth. At their head rode a man in his mid-30s, wearing the fine crimson robes of a royal justice in air. He held high a heavy parchment scroll, dangling with the king's great wax seal. "Make way for the king's justice!" The entire market square froze. The manor guards halted in their tracks, their swords wavering. The villagers held their breath. On his horse, Sheriff Godfrey's face turned as white as a linen sheet. "I am William, a royal magistrate appointed by His Majesty the King." The man's voice boomed with absolute authority, echoing like thunder. "I have come to this shire with a full-armed retinue to establish an assize court and investigate the foul rumors of corruption regarding Sheriff Godfrey." Godfrey began to tremble uncontrollably in his saddle. "A royal justiciar? Here?" William held the royal seal high in the air. "I shall read your sins for all to hear. 1. Simony and bribery. You purchased your office by paying £300 of silver to corrupt lords in London. 2. Forgery. You fabricated 47 false writs to steal the manor fields of innocent commoners. 3. Abuse of power.
You ordered the brutal torture of honest men to silence them. 4. Theft. You embezzled 200 sacks of wheat from the royal granary to line your own pockets. With every crime listed, the villagers' fury grew hotter. "That wicked devil! He stole our livelihoods! He nearly beat Silas to death!" William then turned and looked directly at Maud. "And the documents this brave woman holds are the undeniable proof. I arrived seeking to audit his vault, but I feared he might destroy the evidence before my knights could breach the estate. This woman risked her life to drag the truth into the light." Maud stared at the magistrate in astonishment. "You have come from the capital for us?" William offered her a warm, respectful smile. "You are a marvel, milady. To tear the dungeon doors off their hinges, snap iron chains, defeat dozens of armed guards, and retrieve the evidence from a locked vault. I have traveled the length and breadth of medieval England, but I have never met a woman of such extraordinary valor." William turned his piercing gaze back to the guards. "Hear my command. Arrest Sheriff Godfrey at once." Anyone who defies the royal seal shall be hanged for treason.
The guards hastily sheathed their swords. No matter how much they feared their cruel master, no man dared to defy the king's magistrate.
No, you cannot do this. Godfrey scrambled down from his horse,
attempting to flee into the alleys, but 4 guards tackled him to the muddy ground,
pinning him down. Mercy! I beg of you, show mercy! Godfrey wailed.
His face pressed into the dirt. But there was not a single soul in the Shire who pitied him.
The villagers erupted into deafening cheers. God save the king! God save the magistrate! God bless Maud! People wept openly. Some fell to their knees in prayer, while others embraced their neighbors, crying tears of sheer relief. The market square transformed into a sea of joyous weeping. That very afternoon, a public tribunal was held in the courtyard of the sheriff's court. William presided over the gathering, and people from every neighboring parish came to witness justice. A great hearth fire was built, and every single forged writ was tossed into the flames. As the false papers burned to ash, the rightful owners stepped forward to have their names cleared and their lands legally returned. Silas, the village elder, was granted a purse of silver coins to pay for an apothecary to heal his wounds. As for Godfrey, he was stripped of his titles. His wealth was confiscated by the crown, and he was bound in heavy iron chains. As he was thrown into the back of a wooden cart to be hauled off to the royal dungeons in London, the villagers jeered. "Rot in the dark, you thief! May you reap what you have sown." Before departing, William approached Maud. "You are the true hero of this day. I shall send word to the king himself, ensuring you receive a grand reward for your service to the realm." Maud gently shook her head. "I have no need for a grand reward, my lord. Seeing my neighbors reclaim their stolen lands and knowing my family is safe from harm, that is all the reward I could ever ask for." William nodded. His eyes filled with profound respect. "Your strength is terrifying, milady, but your heart is even greater." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the village, Maud carried Alden on her back and returned to their thatched cottage. Waiting by the wooden gate were Agnes, Clara, and Alice. They had heard the news of the day's incredible events. The moment Agnes saw Maud, her knees gave way, and she collapsed into the dirt path. "Maud!" Agnes's voice trembled violently. "Forgive me." Those 2 words carried the weight of 3 years of bitter cruelty. "I am so sorry for how I treated you. I called you weak. I called you useless. I spat cruel words at you every single day." Tears streamed down the old woman's wrinkled face. "And yet you risked your life for us. You broke into the castle, fought the guards. If it were not for you, my Alden would have died in that cold stone dungeon." Clara and Alice fell to their knees beside their mother. Clara sobbed openly. "I am so sorry, Maud. I was so lazy. I made you do all the heavy washing and the worst of the chores. I never once thought of how tired you must be." Alice wiped her dripping nose with her sleeve. "It was you turning the heavy millstone in the dark, wasn't it?
It wasn't a ghost. It was you. You must have been so exhausted. Yet I only ever looked at you with suspicion."
Maud carefully lowered Alden onto a wooden bench by the door. She walked over to Agnes and gently took the old woman by the arms, lifting her to her feet. "Please, stand up, Mother." Maud wiped a tear from Agnes's cheek. "The past is in the past. From this day on, we need only live as a true family." "Maud." Agnes threw her arms around her daughter-in-law, holding her in a desperate, loving embrace. It was the first time in 3 years she had shown her any affection. "Thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my soul. I am so blessed that you are the mistress of this house." Alden leaned against the wall, watching his mother and his wife embrace. Tears carved tracks through the dirt on his face, but a radiant, peaceful smile spread across his lips. 3 years passed. The estate in the village looked entirely different. The crumbling thatched cottage had been torn down and replaced with a beautiful, sturdy timber cottage with a tiled roof. In the yard, an apple orchard bloomed, branches heavy with sweet fruit. True to his word, William had reported everything to the king, and a royal envoy had arrived, bearing a purse of 100 silver pounds and 100 sacks of grain as a gift for Maud's bravery. Alden had fully recovered his health. With his sharp mind and gentle nature, he became the parish scholar, teaching the village children how to read and write. His terrible cough had vanished, color returned to his cheeks, and he became the most respected man in the Shire. Agnes had completely transformed. Whenever Maud tried to do chores, Agnes would shoo her away. "Sit down, Maud. Rest yourself. I will tend to the hearth fire today." The once cruel mother-in-law now happily baked bread and swept the floors. Clara and Alice walked arm in arm with Maud through the market square, treating her not as a servant, but as an older sister they adored. And there was one more change. Sitting on Maud's lap was a little 3-year-old boy, Robin. He had a round, cheerful face and big, bright eyes that looked exactly like his mother's. "Look, Mother, I am strong too!" Robin shouted in the yard. He marched over to a massive fieldstone, one that a grown man would struggle to lift, and hoisted it above his head with absolute ease. Maud gasped in mock surprise and laughed a bright, ringing laugh. Goodness me, who did our little Robin inherit such incredible strength from? "From you, Mother," Robin giggled, dropping the stone with a heavy thud. Maud pulled her son onto her lap and looked deeply into his eyes. "Robin, listen to me. I must teach you a very important rule. Strength is not something you use whenever you please." "Then when do I use it?" the boy asked, tilting his head. "To protect people. You only use your strength to protect the weak, the sick, and those who desperately need your help. Do you understand?" Robin nodded vigorously. "Like you did, Mother. I will use it just like you." Maud smiled warmly and stroked her son's hair. That evening, the entire family gathered around the large oak table in the timber cottage. The hearth fire crackled merrily. Agnes praised the taste of the roasted meat. Clara and Alice gossiped about the village fair. Alden patiently taught Robin his letters, and Maud passed around trenchers of warm bread. Laughter echoed through the house, never seeming to end. After supper, Maud stepped out into the cool night air. She looked up at the sky over the old monastery hill. The stars were shining brilliantly, like scattered diamonds on black velvet. A gentle breeze swept through the valley, rustling her long hair. "Father," Maud whispered softly into the night. In her mind, she saw the face of Brahm, standing in his blacksmith forge, handing her the heavy iron mace. "I kept my promise, Father. I only unsealed my strength to protect the people I love." The stars twinkled brightly above her, as if the heavens themselves were smiling down, telling her she had done well. Good people? There is an old saying passed down through the generations in our lands. Do the very best you can in this mortal life. Face your trials with a brave and an honest heart, and the heavens above will surely take care of the rest. Our brave protagonist, Maud, endured in absolute silence for 3 long, incredibly difficult years. She took the immense, God-given strength that could once wrestle a massive wild boar to the forest, floor and scatter ruthless bandits like dry chaff in the winter wind, and she buried it deep within her soul. Even when she faced bitter mistreatment, harsh words, and deep sorrow within that cold stone house, she simply bit her lip, bowed her head, and held it all inside. But you must understand, good listeners, that her quiet endurance was never born out of cowardice or a fragile spirit. Not at all. She endured the heavy burdens of the manor and the cruel scoldings, solely to protect the fragile peace of the people she loved most in this world. And when the fateful moment finally arrived, the perilous hour when her family and her village truly needed a fierce protector, Maud did not hesitate for a single second to unleash the power she had hidden away. You see, true strength is not merely about swinging a heavy iron mace, breaking chains, or defeating your wicked enemies in the muddy market square. True strength is having the grace and the boundless heart to embrace, forgive even those who once despised and mistreated you, bringing them back into the warmth of the family hearth. That is the rarest and most genuine power of all. My dear friends, are any of you perhaps holding something heavy inside your hearts right now? Are you enduring a difficult season in your own lives? Waiting for the winter to pass? I promise you with all my heart that your quiet endurance will never be in vain. Just keep your faith strong. When the right time finally comes, your hidden strength and your beautiful spirit will surely shine brighter than the morning sun breaking through the clouds, just like our brave Maud. By the way, my wonderful listeners, I am so curious. Where are you tuning in? From to hear today's medieval tale? Are you listening from the historic streets of London, the old walls of York, the hills of Edinburgh, or the lively taverns of Dublin? Or perhaps you are listening from far across the great ocean, in the bustling cities of the United States, or the vast, beautiful landscapes of Canada? Wherever you hail from, please leave a short line in the comments below to tell me your region. I will be sure to send a bountiful blessing of good fortune, warm cheer, and positive energy straight to your town, your village, or your city. And if you found joy,
thrill and comfort in today's journey, please be so kind as to press that subscribe button and leave a generous like on this tale. Do not forget to ring that notification bell as well, so I can send a swift messenger to let you know the very moment a brand new, exciting adventure is ready for you to hear. Well, my dear friends, that brings us to the end of today's story. Please look forward with a glad heart to the next grand tale I have to share with you. Thank you all so much for gathering around the virtual hearth and listening to my voice today. This has been your faithful narrator, wishing you well.
May you have a peaceful, restful night. Sweet dreams.
And may the stars shine brightly upon your path until we meet again.